right, today's agenda is special education. We're going to be taking a look again at the funding, making sure we understand how the funding changes as the different variables are added and subtracted. So I've asked Gabrielle to put together an explainer sheet, and she's done that. And I think that will fulfill our questions to Craig the other day. So Gabrielle, it's yours.
Good afternoon, committee. You should have two documents from me today. As Craig explained last time, special education costs do consist of two equations, one for categorical aid and then one for excess costs. That categorical aid equation was referenced in that handout from last time. I do have a couple extra copies I won't go over in detail again, but if there's questions, happy to address those. The first document you have with the colorful bars on it is just a representation of the discussion we had last time regarding the comparison of state aid for all students and state aid for special education students. You'll see by the trend line on that document that state aid is increasing for all students and it is increasing for special education students. The increase for special education students is just increasing at a slower rate. Additionally, the back of that document has a line graph for excess costs. Excess costs is what I'll be focusing on with that document with the two boxes on it today. So focusing on that other document with the two boxes on it, hopefully this is a helpful representation of how we calculate excess costs. I'm going to walk through the document, but happy to stop at any point for questions. We do start our estimate with the actual expenditures from the previous fiscal year. And then there's two increases that we always consider. That first one is an increase based on teacher salary increases. And the second is an increase for additional teachers and paraprofessionals. For fiscal year 2022, we estimate a teacher salary increase of about 4%, shown on that right side of the top box. And we estimate about an additional 300 teachers and paraprofessionals, which we then multiply by the estimated cost of those teachers and paraprofessionals. Again, those are just estimates. The number of additional teachers and paraprofessionals has historically been close to 300, so we do usually estimate around that number. And the average salary is generally increased by the same percent as we estimate growth in CAPER's covered payroll. We then add those two numbers to the previous fiscal year's actual expenditures, and it gives us our new estimated total expenditure there in bold. For fiscal year 2022, that's just about $1.1 billion. After that, we use that new number to compute our estimated excess costs. For excess costs, we take out four main items listed there. The first is the average per pupil cost of regular education multiplied by the estimated number of special education FTEs, excluding state hospital residents. That number essentially tells us what it already costs to educate students through the regular classroom setting, and we want to focus on those additional costs for students with an IEP. The next item we deduct out is any federal aid. For fiscal year 22 and 23, we did take into account ESSER money. The third item, moving down to the next line, is Medicaid reimbursements. And finally, we take out a small amount for state hospital administrative costs. And that leaves us with our new excess cost number. Also included there is the amount that would get us to that 92% excess cost, as well as the amount approved in the budget and what the amount is that we're off of the 92%. The same calculation is done for the out year. Instead of the last actual expenditures, we just use the estimate for the previous fiscal year. So in this case, we just use our fiscal 22 estimate to calculate fiscal year 2023. And I'm happy to take questions on that process.
All right, committee, what questions do you have? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the salary numbers include, is that a base salary, or that's including the benefits? What all does that number include, please?
KSDE can correct me if I'm wrong, but that should be the 4% increase that we assume for all salaries, including their benefits. I'm seeing nods.
Representative Johnson.
I just cannot remember the initials, FTE, pupils. What is FTE again?
Sure, so the FTE is the full-time equivalent.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Gabrielle, when we look at the 300 times 71,000, but aren't a large majority of these paraprofessionals? So is that an average or?
A portion is paraprofessionals. This is an estimate of the average increase. This does include additional teachers and paraprofessionals, but this is the average cost we think it'll be for those 300 personnel.
Okay, that's a lot. Okay, and then just real quick, and then Representative Estes, on the handout you gave us last time, it says that in 2020 and to 2021, we added 586 teachers. So, I mean, I guess help me understand, and maybe Craig can expand on this, is that, I mean, what kind of ratio have we moved from of student to teacher? Not suggesting I would even know what a good ratio is, because every year we're adding. The year before was 67. I don't know what it was the year before, then 586 and 300. And I'm just curious what that ratio might look like.
Sure, that's a good question. I don't have information on student-teacher ratio. I'm happy to either follow up or if you want to.
Let's let Representative Estes ask her question, and then if we're finished with questions for Gabrielle, then Craig, I'd love for you to respond to any questions that might come up, including that one would be great.
Am I missing it, or is there a reason why part of the estimate doesn't include the number of students that we have?
So we
Who
do
have an IEP?
The number of students that we estimate for special education is, it is there, it's just kind of hidden. It's in that less average per pupil cost. We're estimating 29,000 students.
Can you show me where you're talking about? Thank you. And that number's gone down?
It has increased over time. If you look at fiscal year 2023, we're estimating an additional 300 students. Generally, that number has trended up.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, and the enrollment, it's hard to get everything on one page, but it looks like we have students, we have 50,000 students? No. Is that right? 60,000 students? How many students do we have? You just said, or is it?
We're estimating 29,000 students for fiscal year 22. It's kind of in the middle of the page in a parentheses.
Okay. I'm looking on this one and I see a 60 and a 13 for Medicaid reimbursement. Okay. Any other questions? So I think the one reason I wanted to bring you back today was because I know there are questions about that excess cost getting, the gap is getting bigger. And the reason that gap is getting bigger, and the only way we could really see it is to actually see the math play out with a couple of years. As we increase that base state aid, and for 22-23, the base state aid jumps again from 4,706 to 4,846 and forevermore, it's going to cause it's inversely proportional to that gap. So if you're going to put more money in here, then it's going to cause that gap to be bigger. And that means your percentage of excess costs, less of it's covered. So, and I think that we can see that. So it helps explain that, not judging on whether that's good or bad, but just that is the negative benefit, if there is such a thing, for each of these students getting more for the base aid. Sure. It's not a negative, but yes, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, am I right that because of the maintenance of effort, if we were, let's just say we decide to put the 155 million in, 155.6 million in on 23, we would be at that point then forever, right? Because of the maintenance of effort?
I will have Craig clarify, but generally, once we put in money, it is harder to take money back out.
Right. We can never go below that. Yeah.
And one thing that Craig did share last time, that's correct. We're adding more each year by what, 7 million or so approximately. But last year, the Department of Education added some ESSER money or some other COVID money if it was not that. And that does not count for maintenance of effort. So that's good to know. But if we were to fund this year agency's request, then you would never be able to back that back down without some kind of waiver, I'm assuming at the federal level. But we'll let Craig talk. Any other questions for Gabrielle, which I really appreciate you hanging with us on this and getting us something that helps to see how it's computed. It really helps. Yes, Representative Estes and then Craig.
This question may be for both of you, because I'm trying to understand the gap, and I get your point that if we increase base state aid, then of course the percentage goes up. But in a real world, how much did our cost go up for special ed per pupil on average? Do we know that number?
So it's a good question. We being KSDE and KLRD, as far as I'm aware, do not track a per pupil expenditure for special education students. That is a helpful measure for us for regular education. But given that special education is so individualized to each student, it's not especially helpful for us to track it on a per pupil basis, because one student may be only receiving very little extra services, and there may be a student that has really intensive services. So we do not track on a per pupil basis, but I think that is a good question. So unfortunately, I don't have a clear answer, but if Craig wants to elaborate.
Because I guess I want to put the gap in perspective to some kind of a real number.
Well, remember also that the 92% was set in statute. It's not necessarily, from what I understand, it was just what they were funding at that level, and that became the 92%. So if you look at the governor's budget, she'll establish a set amount that she is funding, and that was in 2022 was 513 million. And then you take that amount that she said we're funding for special education, and you divide that by what the excess, well, what the number they say they need based on this formula, which is not, as you said, it's not exactly right, because it's just a formula. And then that's how you get that excess cost based on the number that is budgeted divided by what you get on this piece of paper here. But I don't, this is including the catastrophic aid as well? Or no?
The catastrophic aid will be on your, the other sheet we discussed last time for categorical aid. The excess cost will include all of special education. So there's not a direct line item for catastrophic, but it would include those students.
Okay, so help me out again. So it does include the $1 million catastrophic aid in the total, or is that separate?
In the calculation,
It is.
In our the catastrophic aid is called out in the calculation for our categorical aid. It's not called out in the excess cost calculation.
Okay, I don't know if we didn't really understand that. Is it in or out?
We are factoring it into the cost. There's just not a line item.
Okay, so it's all of that, the transportation, all of that's included in this number. That's it. That's the special education number. And, but, okay, great.
It's in that one, so that top number there, the 1.1 billion is what it costs.
Okay.
For all those special education factors. There's just not a specific line item in our excess cost computation. Maybe I'm making that more confusing, but yes, it's in there.
The transportation's in there, the catastrophic aid's in there. Medicaid is not, but everything else is.
Correct. We deduct Medicaid reimbursements.
Okay, gotcha. Perfect. All right, committee, let's ask Craig to come up here. Thank you, Gabrielle. There might be another question. If you could just kind of give us an idea how the student-teacher ratio has changed, anything you'd like to share with us about enrollment. And this would be a good opportunity for you to talk about the governor's budget compared to your agency request. We'll hear it tomorrow. But if you'd like to make a comment on it today, that would just be one less thing you have to comment on tomorrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, if you don't mind, I'm going to back up to the question you were just asking about catastrophic aid and so forth. That is state aid, so that's a part of the, for instance, for FY22, you see the $513 million. That's state aid. Third number up from the bottom in that first box. That includes catastrophic state aid. That includes transportation state aid. That includes Medicaid replacement state aid, which is different from the Medicaid you see above. Since it's special education, we have to make it confusing and have two different Medicaids. And that also includes then the categorical aid for teachers. So that's all contained in the $513 million. And now I'll try to remember the other questions. Back up one other one. You asked about the $71,000 and 300 teachers, and that seems like a high number, even though that's an average salary plus benefits, as the representative asked. The 300 is an FTE number, so when paras are factored in there, they count as 0.4. So they're not adding up each para head count to get to 300. Each para that's added into that 300 is only counting for 0.4, so that doesn't pull the salary down as much as you think it would. So
It's really good to know. So it could be 410
Yes.
heads. So with that in mind, let's come back to the ratio. We've got to be 1-to-1 at this point.
So I can't give you history because we don't have that, but I looked at the number of teachers we estimate, teachers and paras, that we'll have this year compared to the number of students. And you see we estimated 29,000 students. It may be a little less than that, but that's going to be close. We estimate 14,469 teachers and paras. So actually we're less than 1-to-1 for a student-teacher ratio. 14,464. Sorry, I couldn't read my handwriting. And that's an estimate. We'll know the actual number about middle of May.
So this brings me to the question, what would it have been like even maybe 5 years ago? Because we continue to add lots of positions, and I'm thinking that that would be a huge benefit for teachers that are working in special education, that they have this type of ratio. So just give us an idea of what it might have looked like 5 years ago.
Typically, setting COVID aside, we had about 300 FTE a year in special education between teachers and paras. So 5 years ago, 1,500 fewer. Now that's not going to hold true because last year we actually, instead of adding more, we actually declined like every other business did. You just didn't have enough employees to be hired.
Okay, good to know. Any questions for the committee? Anything you want to say about special education related to maybe the budget, the governor's recommendation versus the agency's recommendation?
Just briefly, and I don't have those notes with me, so you'll probably hear some of this again tomorrow. Apologize for that. The state board's recommendation was, rather than trying to make up, since we're talking about FY23, $155 million in 1 year, the state board's recommendation, and you'll hear tomorrow, is to make that up over a 5-year time period, phase it in to get to 92%. And there will be numbers with that shows you how much that would cost each year.
All right, well, I appreciate the overview. Feel free to bring this up again tomorrow since you didn't have your notes and I caught you off guard.
Quite all right.
Committee, are there any other items? Yes, Representative Estes?
This may be leading into tomorrow more, but so you requested at a 70.8% excess rate.
No, ma'am. Didn't request that. That's the way it calculated out. The request would be to fund it at 92%. The amount that was appropriated is what ended up determining the 70.8%.
Okay, because the word request is on that third from the bottom line. And so when I read it, it makes me think that's what you guys asked for. So
Okay,
if I'm,
I understand.
if
Yeah,
I'm
that is
just
not
poorly
actually-
written, or?
Yes. Thank you. I had not noticed that word was there. No, that is not the agency request.
Okay, that clears up a lot of confusion for me. Thank you.
I understand why it says that, but it's not exactly accurate.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Craig, they want us to, over 5 years to go to 92%.
Yes, sir.
And we all know the 92% is an arbitrary number. It's in statute, but it's still arbitrary. It's,
Actually, special education costs were a part of the Montoy lawsuit.
but,
I don't think the court said, and Nick.
Right, the courts didn't say we had to do it
I don't think the court said 92, but they specified more.
I agree, I understand, but they did not specify it had to be 92%.
I don't believe so.
Right. I wish that we could get off the 92% and we could simply get to a decision of, okay, let's, somewhere between 92 and 70%, let's agree that that's maybe the right number and work towards that instead of just constantly at this 92%. I think that would be something that might be able to be looked at. I know you can't make that decision, but just, I just wish that we would, because whether anybody wants to say it, that 92% was an arbitrary number made when they decided that was how much money they had, they divided it, it was 92%, and that went in statute. And so, I think we could all argue, well, does it have to be 92%? Should it be 80%? Should it be 75? I do think that there is probably some cause to be concerned that it continues to go down, but part of that is because we're increasing every year the per pupil rate, at a much higher rate. So it's going to continue to go down unless, and I think that the decision to say, well, we're going to increase per pupil rate by, it could be 100 million next year again. And then also we're going to increase this other by another 155 million over the next 5 years. I think it's unrealistic budget-wise. I just wish we could get to some realistic expectation of what that percentage should be. So just my soapbox. Thank you.
Well, and Representative, to add on to that, it doesn't make sense if we're going to add, what was the total amount that we could attribute to the base increases? Is that 40? No, help me out there, Gabrielle. What's the amount that is attributed to the base increases? Is it, so just the increases? So the 7,909, the difference between what we would have paid last year? I can't read it. Just tell me. 200, but what's the difference between what we, okay. Okay, so, and again, coming back to the point, this is an important discussion. If we're going to put more money in, and I don't know exactly what that amount is in base aid and weightings than the year before, that is a win for kids. It is a win for kids. It doesn't matter where you put it in, you put it in for the kids. And now that percentage of excess costs is not attainable. It doesn't make sense why that 92 I would understand if it were static and we were always putting in the same amount every year in that formula, but it's not. We're putting in more up here. So then the gap gets bigger. So help us understand why the 92% is a good policy.
I would look on this sheet.
Yeah.
Somewhere near the middle, where it talks about projected total expenditures less the average per pupil cost of regular education. And you see for FY '22, $229,361,000. And the following year, that's projected to be $238,707,000. That amount is getting subtracted off of the total special ed expenditures before you calculate excess cost. So as the money put in for regular education increases, we're subtracting that out. So as it gets bigger, we're subtracting out a bigger number.
But
It
Craig,
is, that may or may not be a completely fair way to do it, but it is being taken into account.
okay, but on that note, again, you say regular education students, that's the money that's attributed to those special education students. That is money that stays with that child theoretically. And so they are getting an increase that doesn't show when you do the percentage of excess costs. That's why the policy is the policy and statute is problematic because it doesn't tell the story. It does not tell the story. If we are going from a 76% excess cost down to 70, but we're increasing per pupil, every kid's getting more, and we're also factoring in then it doesn't tell the full story. And we know that the governor obviously agrees with us on that because she has not increased she increases it, but, and I'm not, right, but not to the 92%. So that's where the problem is.
And we may disagree that the increase in regular education costs for the special ed kids is being subtracted out. So we may disagree on that, but you are correct. The governor did not recommend the additional funding that the state board requested.
It's being subtracted out because they already have it. They have it in hand.
Which means it
So-
doesn't get calculated as part of the excess cost then.
Right, but would you rather not have it in hand? I mean.
Oh, no, absolutely.
So the money's there for the kids, and so you have to subtract it out of it because we're trying to find out what is more than that. If it costs $7,909, how much more does it cost for special education? So it makes sense that it's subtracted out, and the more that we put in here, it makes sense that it's gonna change that percentage. The important thing is the maintenance of effort. The important thing is look at the ratio. 1-to-1 almost, that's great. Now, of course, we got to fill the positions. That matters. Certainly, it definitely does. But I just wish we would have, I guess I just would love a really frank discussion about why the 92% doesn't work. Because apparently, it's not working. And apparently, the governor has not held that as a priority. So. Representative Vest.
Craig, I was wondering if you could answer the question that I asked earlier about the average per pupil expense on just the special ed portion of a special ed student.
Yes, we can calculate that. I don't have it, but we could calculate it fairly easily.
Do you remember off the top of your head a range? Like, what is the most we spend on a child in Kansas? Do you happen to know that?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We don't have, and I would hesitate to give you a number. Gabrielle's response was very accurate. It's going to be a wide range on students.
Which you would expect.
You would expect.
But I think an average would help put this into something that's real for me to understand this and where we are and or do we have the right number or not? So thank you.
Certainly.
And it was just come to my attention, and I do have this. It's the performance audit for special education costs. It's 2018. I would encourage the committee to go to the LPA post-audit site and pull it. And yes, states do it differently. Kansas, Michigan, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Wyoming do this partial reimbursement. Others have multiple student weightings that would make it more, would make it definitely different. I don't know if it's better. So anyway, just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention. Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Craig. Hopefully this is a simple question. Regardless of what we fund base state aid per pupil at, excess costs are still going to increase year after year just to provide for the extra resources.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry, but it occurs to me I can get an answer for your question pretty quick, I think. Or
And
approximately.
after that, I have another question.
So the special education expenditures on average for a student, about $23,165. $23,165.
Thank you.
Let me, I'll verify that, and if I'm wrong, I'll certainly let you know.
I appreciate you getting that. Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, so another question, and apologies to the committee on this, but I think the more we understand, the better off we are. But looking at how this may apply to different districts and how some of them, and I'm just looking at this chart in here, and this is 2018, but maybe you could take a look at it and come back and talk to us tomorrow about it. But it just shows, for example, that, I'm gonna give an example. Wellington is their percent of excess costs covered is 148% of categorical aid. And then you go all the way down to Blue Valley, Wichita and Lansing, and they're talking about, in that time frame, 67% of their categorical aid, 62%, and then 57%. And I just want to know, why is it that way? And I don't know if you can answer that for the categorical aid, where one school district can get above 100%, and then other school districts are getting like half of it or less, percentage-wise.
So for starters, categorical aid is calculated on a statewide total of teachers and paras and so forth. So if your particular co-op or your particular district pays more salary, then the amount you receive is going to be a lower percentage. But the other factor that's probably bigger is the needs of the students in your district. If you have a district that needs more staff because of the needs you have with your students, then you're going to have a smaller percentage. If the needs of your students aren't quite so high, you'll have a higher percentage covered by the state. So there's more than one factor. Those are probably the two leading factors, though.
Okay, all right, so I guess whenever we look at these, we have to take that into consideration. I don't fully understand that, but I get the explanation. I appreciate that. Any other items? I really appreciate you all coming in today, and tomorrow we will be having our budget hearing, and so that's not action, it's just reviewing the budget. So, yes, Representative Witt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for everyone's purposes, which documents will you refer to tomorrow? Like you just mentioned this.
Well, this-
started, then we'll pick
Sure.
up.
Well, I didn't know I was going to mention. I have a special education folder, and I had the items that Gabrielle gave us, the committee last time, so that's what I had. And then I just had the one that you had.
But for tomorrow, so we're all prepared.
Could you email it to Holly, or no? Okay.
Okay.
Yes, legislative website, but it would be great, sometimes just the direct email is handy, then we get the right thing. And are you providing copies or no copies? It's up to you. Sorry. Okay, so pay attention to Holly's email. She'll let you know if there's a copy or not, or if you need to make your own copy, but she'll send it to you. So how about that? Sound good? All right, committee, we are adjourned.